So in today's video, I want to get a Z20LET test fitted in a Vauxhall Nova. But like with all my projects, it's never that simple. So the first issue we have is it's still a complete up and running car. It's got an engine in. So I need to take the engine out before I can do anything. But the main issue is I've made it difficult for myself. Now I could have just put the same gearbox fitted to that engine on this, which is an F20. It probably would have been okay. However, we want reliability with this car. We want it to last. So we're opting for a Vauxhall F23 gearbox as found mated to this engine originally. Now the problem with an F23 gearbox is it's cable shift, it's got a hydraulic clutch and it's massive. So I need to somehow try and shoehorn that gearbox into this very tight engine bay and make it all work but look nice as well. And just to make things even more difficult, I need to chop the front panel to make the intercooler fit behind this cutout in the bumper that looks nice. So the very first thing I'm going to do is get a Sharpie and mark where the bumper cutout is on the front balance. So I know exactly where the intercooler needs to go, because I'm going to have to chop quite a lot of the car to make that work. So this is a very, very clean car, one of the best I've ever had the honour to work on. So I want to protect it, so we are going to mask a few edges up before we start removing things. The first thing I want to remove is the bonnet because it's in the way, like so. Now a lot of people on the internet don't agree with taking this engine out to fit a different engine. This is a very clean car and they just think it's sacrilege. Now what you've got to remember is I built this car in the first place so I can make it very nice once again, and the engine we're fitting in the car is going to be even better than this one. It's a better spec, it's going to have more power, and at the end of the day the owner wanted it to have more power and we're kind of at capacity with this engine. So we're going turbo. And at the end of the day, the modified car scene is all about making cars unique and individual to that particular person. So you've got to break a few eggs sometimes to make an omelette, as the saying goes. So that's exactly what we're doing now. We're taking the engine out. We're going to make it look worse to make it better in the long run. So if you do think that what we're doing is completely wrong, go and watch the video of me building this car in the first place. But if you want to carry on seeing me make this into a fabulous turbo car, carry on watching. Now this is quite a minimalist C20XE engine. There's not a lot on it. It's a very, very minimal wiring loom. Obviously having throttle bodies and stuff, there's not too much to it, not too much involved. Yet it still took quite a long time to take it all apart in the end. I suppose I was taking my time. I didn't want to scratch anything. I wanted to take care. We have provisionally sold the engine, so I just wanted to make sure it came out in one piece in really good order, and I also wanted to make it nice and logical for the next owner so we could fit it. So I put all the clips back on everything and just made sure everything was in a logical place so it would be easier for them to fit in the future. So that is the top stuff done. Now we're moving on to the bottom stuff. The first thing I do is remove the centre cap from the speed line. Now, if anybody's owned these before, you'll know that they can be quite tight. So I always tend to just fold a bit of rag over a screwdriver just to prise it out. And then strip the suspension. I just take the bottom arms off, tie rods, unbolt the drive shafts, and knock them through. Now, obviously, everything is only just over a year old, so it's not overly complicated. Everything comes out easily, nothing sees, just how you'd expect. I take the crank pulley off because I am concerned it might scratch the chassis leg. I'm not exactly sure if that bit needs painting yet, so I'd rather not damage anything. I then undo the V-band and the exhaust flexi, which I made last year again. I unscrew the front tie rod mounts, pull them out of the way, and then loosen off the gear linkage and slide out the rod. Again, this is all going, so I won't be needing it again. Then do exactly the same process on the other side. Wheel off, bottom ball joint out, drive shaft nut and split pin removed, push it all through, pull the drive shaft out. So that's pretty much the engine and transmission side of things done. Next job is to take the GSI front bumper off. Now, people always say working on old cars is a dream, and this is a good example of that. We've got two bumper iron bolts come out each side of the chassis leg, and then a couple of little self-tapping screws out the side of the bumper, and that is it. It just slides off. Really simple. Next job is to get the rad out. Now you can't really get the rad out with the manifold on, and if I take the manifold off I could risk damaging the rad. So I decide the easiest thing to do would be to drill the spot welds out for the slam panel support, because this isn't staying anyway, and with it removed it'd be a lot easier to get the rad out and the massive Astra exhaust manifold off. And as you can see, the access is now much better. So again, everything's only a year old, so all the nuts and studs come straight out, just how you'd expect. Off slides the manifold. So we are now ready to take the C20XE out. Now, this is the first time I've actually done it on a lift, so this should be a lot easier. So what I've done, I've strapped it up, as you can see. Plan is to take the mounts down, then drop the engine down onto the floor, and that should do the job nicely. I've put a bit of masking tape in the engine bay. Not so worried about the passenger side because I'm going to be chopping that about a lot to fit the F23 gearbox, but the driver's side I want to try and keep nice. So let's do it. So over the years, I've taken more engines out of Novas than any other car. So I've pretty much got it down to a T. So there's 3 mounting brackets on the engine, one on the offside front, one on the near side front on the gearbox, and one on the back of the gearbox. I always take these brackets off. Not everybody does, but it just gives you a little bit more space. And when it's a 16 valve engine like this, you just have to be mindful of the offside front mounting bracket on the chassis leg because it can get in the way of the pulleys. So I tend to just drop the engine back a little bit and down she comes. And that's the engine completely removed and slid out the way. Right, we're now on to the fun things. Let's start cutting this shell up and making things fit. This is the intercooler. Now it should fit that way, the other side of this. However, I don't want to do that because I want the front cutout to be functional on the bumper. So we're going to fit it essentially like this. As you can see, that don't fit. I need to cut the shell to make it kind of fit because at the minute it's not going to fit. So this lot is all coming out. Now I'm not going to cut the lower bit just yet. I'm just going to cut across here. Cut this bit out. You don't need any of it. It's only decorative. And then we can make this fit a lot better. So top tips for cutting up body shells such as this from me. Now, I always use a 4.5-inch grinder and a 1mm cutting disc. Don't buy a cheap disc, they don't last very long. Get something decent like a Bosch cutting disc or just a decent branded one. Don't make the mistake of buying cheap ones from Amazon because they're just terrible. Mark everything properly. Don't just eyeball it. I am pretty good at doing stuff like this now, but I never used to be. It's taken me years of practice. So if you're not confident, measure, mark, and most importantly, take your time. Wear PPE, don't just squint because you need your eyes to see what you're doing. Right, so this is looking pretty good so far. So I think that's about how much it wants to be stuck out. So what I basically need to do, because you can see that is not square at all, I need to trace around it and then cut that section out so this can drop down into here so you can see it behind the bumper. So as you can see, I've traced around the back. I'm going to add 10mm this way just to give me a little bit of leeway because that's very close to the radiator mounts, and I believe the radiator is going to have to come further forward anyway. It does on the C20LET anyway, but Z20LET's got a slightly smaller head, so we will see. So I'm going to give it 10mm, something like that, and then we'll start cutting. Now, if you want to fit a Z20LET in your Nova, don't be put off by this. You don't have to go to this level of extremeness. You can just put a smaller intercooler in. However, this is quite a large intercooler because we want around 400 horsepower from this engine. So obviously, bigger is better in that sense, unfortunately. Hence why we're having to cut so much out. The other issue is the bumper has already got a big mouth hole in it for an intercooler. So if we just mounted it higher up, like where it would be normally, you wouldn't see the intercooler, plus you're not going to have the airflow. Hence why we're doing this. Now this big section's out, it's time to go around everything with a die grinder just to neaten the edges up. Again, attention to detail. Spending a bit of time here makes the difference between looking from a backstreet garage job to professional job. So that's what we're doing. Also going to add a couple of clearance cutouts for things like the welds on intercooler to make sure it all fits nice and tight and just fits properly. That is intercooler and the radiator kind of mocked up in the right place. Now, I'm going to be completely honest, I'm going to have to put the engine in to make sure it does fit, because on my C20LET, I don't think it'll fit. I think it'll be touching the turbo at the minute. But like I said earlier, the head is smaller on the Z20LET, it's slightly narrower. So I think we'd have a bit more room, but yeah, I might have to still move this forward a little bit, but I'm trying to cut the minimum amount out of the bumper because this is a very wide intercooler. Worst case, I'll get something else. We won't use this. We'll use something a bit narrower, but it would be nice to use this because it's a nice piece of kit. And just to make it clearer, as you can see on this side, this is the engine bay side. This is where we're at. Now, that is quite close to that bolt. You can run these bolts in upside down, so you can put the nut on the top, which I probably will do. Or we'll just have to put tie rods on before we put the rads in. I'm not really sure. I'm going to make the rad removable from the front end without taking everything off like previously, because that's a pain, so I might make this removable. But yeah, we will be able to pull the rad out the front. So I'm going to mark where these studs go. I'm going to drill a hole so it slots down to the right height, and then I'll come back. But yeah, pretty happy with that. A little bit tight, but it's 2-litre turbo and a Vauxhall Nova. It's going to be tight. So just to clarify, I'm moving the radiator to the centre to give me more clearance for the intercooler. If you don't do this, you can't fit an intercooler like this. So next job, this little high spot here, I'm going to panel weight this so it's flat. We don't need it anymore. It was the original radiator mount, obviously it's not required. So I'll make it flat, then the radiator will sit nice and level all the way across. I just use a cheap hammer and dolly to do this. And there we go, that's looking pretty good. Nice and straight, nice and square, and nice and professional. Next job is to degrease all this area because I want to treat it, because obviously once it's welded up, you won't be able to get in there afterwards. So I'll just go over the whole thing with some sandpaper, degrease it, and then I use some weld-through copper primer. This is professional stuff to just treat the whole area and just stop it going rusty. I give it 2 good coats of this and I let it dry between each coat. Right, so I've just cut this bit of box section out. So what I've basically done, I've cut it to length and I've slotted it down this edge here, and the plan is I'm going to turn it into a bit of angle iron basically. So that fits in there nicely. It's 50mm by 100mm box. The plan is I'm going to trace the underside and I can cut that to fit that gap nicely. And this is 3mm, so it's nice and strong. Not that the front valance needs to be overly strong, but you know it's going to tie it all in nicely. Obviously secure these a little bit better, this tie rod mount. So let's get tracing. The other problem we've got is this bit here. I'm going to have to stretch that slightly. I'm not exactly sure I'm going to do that. That's where the intercooler goes. That's basically the weld for the intercooler. So yeah, I might, once I've cut it out, I might try and stretch it a little bit. I'll see how it works. If it doesn't work, I'll just cut that bit out. I love making things. This is my happy place, whether it be making things out of metal or making videos for you guys. So if you love watching them, please support the channel by hitting that subscribe button. So this is what we've come up with. Looks pretty good, if I do say so myself. Pretty happy with the fit. So it will sit in a little bit more than this. Next job, I need to try and stretch this area. So I did have a good think how to do this, and my best plan was to use a bit of heat to heat the metal up, make it a little bit softer, and I also had a little stretch slot in the corner, which allowed me to stretch the metal that bit easier. I set the vise to the desired width, so I could use this as a bit of a template to then use a hammer and a socket to stretch the metal. I used a socket because I wanted the correct size curve. This was a very good jig, and then I used a blunting chisel just to sharpen up the edges a little bit, followed by another bit of right angle, which is a bit thicker, just to straighten it all up afterwards. And there we go. After a bit of dressing back, I'm quite happy with that. Follows quite nicely. See, a little bit high and low in places, but obviously this will just pull down. Main thing is getting this nice and square. So yeah, I'm going to give it a few tacks and then get the bottom bit bang on right. And then I can start shaping some of this. But before that, I need to do this side to match. What you can hopefully see is I have done a little relief cut in there, just because I figured if I tried to stretch it that much, this would probably bend, and I didn't want that to happen. And to be fair, I quite like that, so it's probably going to stay. It's good drainage. So I've seen a few people do similar things with big front intercoolers on Novas before, and what they never do, and it's always annoyed me a little bit, is they never put air holes in. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm drilling some holes in the front of this so that air can still pass through, because at the end of the day, there's no point having an intercooler if it's a piece of solid metal behind it, because it's just not going to flow. So I use some oil and drill several holes in the metal piece after marking them precisely where I want them, clean them all up afterwards with a cone cutter, and then I use my cheap AliExpress dimple die tool. This just gives it a professional look and also makes it a bit stronger. So one thing I always like to do if I ever cut these slam panels out like so, is I weld these little tubes here. So these are the mounts for the tie rods, and I just think it makes it a little bit stronger because that's quite a solid tube. It reinforces it a little bit more, because these are the kind of areas where they crack. Now, a lot of people reckon Novas pull apart here, all over the place. My experience, they don't. They can crack here and they can crack around the top. But generally, if it's a clean car like this, they don't have any problems, even with 300, 400 horsepower. Now the internet will still tell you that the car will pull itself to bits if you don't stitch weld it, but from my experience that's not true as long as you reinforce some of the key areas like these bits here. Right, so this panel is now fully made, dressed back, and I've just primed the underside with some weld through copper primer. And what I have done is I've put these air holes in, and I've also used a dimple dye just to give them a bit of a swage. Now I've done this because my theory is, so the intercooler is going to sit there and it's just going to allow a little bit of air to go through. Plus it's a nice little area so you can get some wax oil in and just, you know, preserve it so you can wax oil it over the years and look after it. So yeah, that's why I've done that. Didn't really need to do it, but I figured it's going to help. Right, let's get this welded into place. So with any fabrication, I always recommend tacking things into place first. Don't just go for a continuous seam because things do bend and buckle and twist. So I tack the centre and then I pull the sides in using this G-clamp, tap everything into place and start tacking it all up. Now, being that this is 3mm thick, it welds really nicely to the cross member. I put most of the heat into the 3mm thick piece and then just blend it into the thinner piece of the cross member. Once we tack it all, I do inch stitches all the way across the top piece. Now, technically, some people will say you're meant to seam all the way around, but that just gives you more chance of it cracking because it can't flex as much. Anyway, inch stitches is going to be plenty strong enough for this. It's already far stronger than the original, so I'm not worried whatsoever. And there we go, that is welded and dressed back a little bit. Now, I've just stitch welded the top. It's more than strong enough. Definitely stronger than original because it only had a few spot welds originally. So next job, we're going to just test fit the intercooler. And look at that. That looks pretty damn good if I do say so myself. Now I'm going to make a couple of little brackets will come off here so it can bolt on the bottom like so. Yeah, pretty good. So I'm kind of happy with the fitment of this for now. I'm not exactly sure if it's going to fit behind the bumper yet, but it can't go any further forward. So if it doesn't, we're going to have to look into other options. Now, one thing I definitely know is the bumper bar will not fit, so I'm going to have to do a bit of trimming on the bumper bar. Because as you can see, it's pretty much miles away. So we might even have to delete it. We'll see what happens. Next job is to quickly box this end in. Again, every time I do something like this, I'm making the car significantly stronger. Because you've got to remember, this original cross member was only spot welded in to the chassis legs. Now it's stitched and seamed all the way around and everything's boxed in. So what I did with this is I used a bit of 2mm offcut steel, which is the same thickness as the original chassis leg, cut it roughly to shape, welded around it and dressed it back with the grinder. So I've just trimmed the bumper bar. As you can see, I've had to cut a bit out of it, but it does fit pretty well, so I'm pretty chuffed. And again, on the underside, again, I've cut quite a bit out, but it fits, plenty of clearance. So the plan is I'm going to have some little tabs that weld onto here and here, so this can bolt on. I'm also going to raise it slightly, so it's not going to be sat on this platform, because I don't want aluminium touching the steel because it's going to corrode. So I want to make sure there's a bit of an air gap all the way around, like so. So use a bit of the offcut to make the tabs. Now notice there's a round edge on this. I cut it out square, a little bit bigger than it needs to be, center punch it, drill a hole in it, and then I go around with a flat disc on the grinder to then make the round edge. I find making a nice round edge like this is the difference between anyone doing it and a professional doing it. It just looks so much nicer if you put a round edge on it rather than just a straight square cut. And then weld it to the cross member and hey presto, nice and strong. Now because the lower front valance is tapered, as you can see, the bolts won't go in easily. So my solution to this is to use a round bit of bar to basically panel beat the lower piece so I can then get a bolt straight in. Again, this is a good example of using stuff you have laying around to do a nice job. I then use a normal orbital sander with a 60 grit pad, take some of the paint off. This is a good key for the X primer to stick to. So there we go, I've just put some X primer on this, dressed it back. We've got the tabs now for intercooler, and that is the cutout all done. I'm pretty pleased with it. I think it looks pretty good and it's nice and strong, much stronger than original, so it should reinforce this cross member a bit more. So now the cross member's all done, the next job is to remove this gearbox mount. Now this is completely in the way of the F23 gearbox, so the bracket's got to go. So I need to clean this back, drill the spot welds off and take this off. There's a few ways to do this, but this is my preferred method. So I use a wire wheel to remove all the factory seam sealer, and then I use a bit of sandpaper to try and reveal where spot welds are. Now normally you can see these because they're high and low spots, and then I use a spot weld drill where I can to drill these out, and I also use a round bird piece on a die grinder to do the awkward ones, because some of them are a little bit awkward to get to, such as this one below here, because I just can't get my drill in. And once they're all out, after a bit of persuasion with a chisel and a tapping stick, it pulls off. Right, so with this build, I'm going to make 3 custom engine and gearbox mounts. Now, what I've done, I've made these myself. So these are Corsa rear axle poly bushes, and I've made the sleeve. So the sleeve's basically some scrap steel I had laying around. And what I've done was found so it was a nice tight fit with the poly bushes, and then I've cut them to size so I could use these to make some mounts. But we've also bought some smaller ones. Now these are a little bit better probably for the front mount because they're a little bit more petite, a little bit smaller. So my plan is to use a selection of these. I've got 3 of them and 2 of them to make something work. Now, I'll probably use this for the rear gearbox mount because I think that's going to take quite a lot of battering. I like the fact they're solid, which means there's not going to be a lot of movement. So the engine's not going to move much, which is going to make the car handle better, and it's going to feel better overall. Yeah, it's going to vibrate a little bit, but it will put the power down better. So when people fit 2-litre big block engines in a Vauxhall Nova, everybody tends to space the rear mount. Now, if you go on Google, go online, do a bit of a search, everybody says you need to space it 10 mil. Well, the reason everybody did that back in the day was for chassis leg clearance. Now, this chassis leg's being cut and notched, so this chassis leg should run level all the way across there. What I've done is I've trimmed a bit of this off, folded it in and notched it basically, seam welded it back up so it's nice and strong. But back in the day, what people used to do is just used to beat this thing with a hammer a little bit, space the engine over 10 mil, and that gave them enough clearance so they didn't need to worry. Now this has got ample chassis leg spacing. So these engines were only really spaced over for the alternator. It was nothing to do with the diff. The diff's in the same place from a 1.2 to a 2 litre. So it's literally for the alternator. Now the drive shafts are the same length as Nova drive shafts. So it's not like the drive shafts take into account this 10 mil. So in theory, if it can go 10 mil that way, it can also go 10 mil that way. And as we've got plenty of alternator clearance, that is exactly what I'm going to do. I want to remake this mount from scratch, but instead of sticking out 10 mil, I'm going to make it stick in at least 10 mil. I'm going to make it stick in as much as possible. And the reason for that is I could always space it, but I can't take it away. So as you can see, it sticks out quite a lot. So I can make that go in quite a lot. I plan to use the original outer cage, but I also want to make it go in as much as possible. So I'm going to trim some of this back. I'm going to mount one of these inside there. I'm going to cut all this back, mount that inside there, so it's in the same position as the top bolt hole, because on a solid mount for Nova, they've only got 1 bolt hole in them in anyway. It's the top bolt. So cut all this out, weld that in as close as possible, and then worst case, I could space it out. And in doing so, I'm hopefully going to have a little bit more gearbox spacing, because on an F23 in a Vauxhall Nova, you've got no space here. Now, you've seen me do one before for Cookie. We've cut loads of this out to make the F23 fit. And I really don't want to do it with this shell, so I'm going to go for a different approach. Now, this is the F23 bolted to the old block. Now, I've done this as a bit of a test rig. It's obviously a lot lighter than an engine, and it's a bit smaller. I'm going to make a dummy head, bolt the turbo to it, so I know exactly where everything's going to be. But the first job I need to do is this mount. So I need to take that off and see what we can do with it. So I want to do this in a methodical way and make sure the bush is in line with the centre of the top bolt hole. I use a ruler and a Stanley blade to make a reference point on the edges of the bush, and then I cut the centre of the bush out with a Stanley. As I need the metal to be nice and clean, I decide to use fire to burn the rest of the rubber out to make it a bit easier for me. And while the fire is doing its thing outside, I start making a replica cylinder head out of some 2x4 timber. So you might think I'm pretty mad for doing this, but I'm doing it so I can bolt the old turbo up in exactly the right place to make sure we've got plenty of clearance. Doing it this way ensures that the test rig is as light as possible, that everything is in the right place, and you know nothing's going to foul once you build it all. As you can see, the turbo is exactly the same place, so I'm really happy with that. So the rubber has now burnt off, which now means I can start fabricating up the metal mount, the fun bit. So I pull it in the vise and I cut off the outer lip. This instantly gives me another 6-7 mil, and then I can start fitting the insert. So what I do, I tack weld a washer to the insert just to get the spacing bang on, and then I tack that onto the mount itself. and then make the end plates what go on the end of the mount. This is going to box it all in. I also seam weld the insert inside the mount first, and then seam weld all this on. So it's really, really strong. This is not going to go anywhere. This is going to be a really nice job once done. I really do go to town on it. As you can see, I even weld the inside of the 3mm plate as well as the outside. And then repeat the process on the other side. Again, tack it into place first, tap it all down so it's nice and level, and buzz it all up. Once I'm happy with all the welding, I dress it all back. So I start with a grinding disc, then move on to a 40 grit flat disc, followed by a 120 flat disc to make it nice and smooth and to look really professional. And there we go, that is dressed back and painted and fitted. Next job, we need to give it a bit of clearance on the back because the bolt is an M12 bolt and there's not quite enough room. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use transfer punch once again to put a dot on the chassis, and then I'm going to cut a hole in the chassis for clearance for the bolt. And in theory, you should be able to tighten the bolt with a long spanner through the end of the chassis leg here. Now, once again, I do want to apologise for the microphone noise. There is a bit of interference. I do keep banging the microphone on my jacket. Unfortunately, I am no professional videographer. I do try my best, but I like to think my talent's more in making things. There we go, that's the mount on. I've even put a washer behind it, which I made from the offcut of the little sheet I used to box it all in. So really good. All bolted up, plenty of clearance on the back, really happy, and it's definitely setting at least, I would say at least 10, 15, if not 20 mil. So that's going to give us loads more clearance that side. Right, and next job, I'm going to use this engine crane to winch this mock-up engine into place. Now, obviously, we've got one mount, so we can put it on this mount. Then we need to get the engine level, start working out exactly how we're going to do the rest of the mounts. So I fitted this gearbox to an Nova once before, many years ago, and it fitted terribly. I had to hack loads out the near side chassis leg, so I have been dreading this, but I will say this new mount has made the job so much better. It nearly fits straight away, which I'm very pleased about. So what can I say? Well, as you can see, plenty of clearance here. That is set in about 20 mil more than standard. There's still some alternating clearance, not loads, I'm going to be honest, but there is still some. So yeah, I am pretty chuffed with that. Also, this side is absolutely amazing. Now, when I've tried to do this before, we've cut tons of this out, and with the exception of this being a little bit close to the brake lines, that's the gear linkage set up, I could easily move the brake lines and that bolt there catching. So all I think I need to do is just make a bit of a half moon cut out here, and that should be ample. As you can probably see, it's pretty level. You line it up like that. So really happy with that. So the F23 is actually off my old Corsa V6, and it's a front-mounted one, so it's from a Vectra Reef, so the earlier style one, which do give you a little bit more room in a Nova. And this is the mount I made for the Corsa V6, very, very solid, it's 5mm. Now, it ain't going to fit this, because obviously it's for a Corsa, not a Nova, but this bit will, so I can block this off here, and I can make something to adapt the two. Yeah, really, really happy. And I'm pretty certain the diff's already pretty much in the right place. So I might have to go a little bit higher, but it looks pretty in line. So yeah, so far, very, very happy indeed. So I start off by lopping the end of the mount off, the bit I don't need, and I use a bit of old cardboard to start making some kind of template up. I cut a piece of 5mm steel out, which is just the right shape, and then I start tacking it into place. Now I am doing this slightly different to how people would normally do it, and I'm going to build the mount inside the chassis leg. But first off, I need to make this front bracket up. So as you can see, now it's all buzzed up properly, I triangulate it and make it really strong, really beefy. This is not going anywhere. Right, so this mount is now done. It's taken me an hour and a half just to do this little bit here, but it's very strong and it's not going to go anywhere. So that is the main point. So I want to do something very different, so I've never seen on an Nova before, and that is I want to use one of these, and I want to basically cut a hole in the chassis leg, so this goes inside the chassis leg, hole all the way through, and then weld it into place, and then you can get to the bolt from the other side, and it's going to kind of basically bolt all the way through, be nice and strong. That is my plan. I think that's going to work very well, and it's going to be a little bit different. So let's see if I can make it work. I use a Sharpie just to mark the centre, and I take the bracket off, lower the gearbox down, and then drill the hole. So after centre punching it, I start with a 5mm pilot hole, and then I go on with a core cutter. This is a 50mm, and then I can insert the sleeve straight in. Now obviously I do dress the area back first, and I do put some copper primer in as well. I put the bush in using a magnet to hold it into place, and then weld it all the way around. Then I core drill the centre out for the other side, panel beat it into shape, weld the other side, and then I dress it all back with a flap disc. So there we go. That is cut from both sides, welded from both sides. I think I will fill these holes in as well, just to give it a bit more strength, but it is very strong. So, just going to test fit it. Polybush in. So I'm really happy with the test fit, so I'll take the mount back off. Now, before anybody says anything, I do triangulate the mount a little bit more, because even though it's 5mm, I'm still a little bit worried about the top bit flexing. Not that I think it will, but extra strength is never a bad thing. Now the gearbox is back down, I can cut this little half moon shape out for the clearance for the turret. And then lift the gearbox back in and test fit it all to make sure it all fits. And that is looking pretty good. Now, if you didn't know, YouTube's got a new hype feature which helps small up and coming channels like myself grow. So could you please, if you're enjoying the video, click the hype button as well as the like button. It means a massive amount for me and helps get me on the leaderboard. Now, my first video to get hyped actually made second in the UK, so it did really well. I'd like that to continue, so please hype away if you feel you want to. So we're now doing the rear mount. So we've used the original as a template. I've basically gone around it with some black aerosol, and then I've drilled holes in it and elongated it using my die grinder. Then I cut the piece out and dressed it back. And then we're moving on to the bracket. We're using 8mm steel for this, really strong stuff. And I make a little cardboard template just so I can mark all the centers and make sure everything's bang on in the right place. And the piece of metal I had wasn't actually big enough, so I had to extend it, which is a little bit frowned upon, but trust me, this is strong enough. I V'd it out first, and it's had some good penetration both sides. And don't forget, this is 8mm thick steel, and I do triangulate it afterwards and box it all in. So this definitely isn't going anywhere. It's probably the strongest part on the whole car. So once dressed back, I start to work out exactly where the mount is going to go. I bolt the bracket to the gearbox. I raise the gearbox to exactly where I think it needs to be. This is a little bit of guesswork, but it's educated guesswork. And then I can start making the mount itself. So I use another one of these sleeves. I weld it straight onto the metal piece I've already cut out. And then I triangulate it all and box it all in with some nice, decent, solid weld seams. And that's it all done, dressed back and primed. Fit the bush and it's ready to be bolted on. So I'm really happy with how that's come out. It looks really professional. Really strong, and it's also really light, so yeah, dead chuffed for that. I bolt it into place, then I use a transfer punch to mark exactly where I need to drill a hole through into the bracket. I then transfer this to the vise, and I can start boxing the rest of it in. So as this is on solid mounts, I did want some adjustability, so I've cut this bit of metal out and I've elongated the hole once again with my die grinder. And now, because it's so thick, I need to bend it. So what I do, I just use the angle grinder, put some slots in it first, bend it into position, then I weld it both sides. That way, it's still very strong. It's an easy way of doing it in-house with limited tools. I dress it back, and then it's a case of putting it on, working out exactly where it needs to be, and then welding it onto the other part of the bracket. Again, this is thick stuff, so I can put some proper heat into this and buzz it up really nicely, so it's not going to be going anywhere. I dress it back once again and then triangulate this section in here just to make sure it is proper strong. People have complained in the past that my mounts haven't been strong enough. I don't know why, because they definitely are, but this will shut everybody up. So that is the rear mount done, made out of 8mm steel. That's not going anywhere, that is very strong. Now let's get it bolted up. So bolts on pretty much as standard. The one thing I will do before I do the final assembly is I'll lock out all the bolts to make sure it's not going to be going anywhere. And look at that. Really pleased with that. Really solid. I am that pleased I put my name on it. So that is it. The engine is mounted and I'm absolutely thrilled with it. As you can see, I've put the rad in and intercooler. The engine is sat on its own mount and I am dead chuffed with it. Now I've raised the back of the engine up a little bit more than normal, probably about ½ an inch higher. Now, the sump should be more level doing it this way. And it also means I've got more alternator clearance, and because this is a lower car, the drive shafts are going to be straighter. So obviously lower car, the drive shafts normally go up an angle. This should have straighter drive shafts, which will help with traction and torque steering, things like that. So that's the reason I've done it. So what do we need to do? We need to trim this a little bit more, and I need to box this in. I also need to drill holes for the gear cables, but I haven't got any yet. So I need to sort it out. I need to do a couple little trims, things like this, just clearance trims, but I am absolutely over the moon with how well it fits. And worst case, if the back end is too high, it's really simple. All I need to do is put some spacers in the rear mount and drop it down slightly. So nothing to worry about. So yeah, absolutely overjoyed with how it's come out. So that is that, folks. I can't stress how happy I am with this and how it's come out. The mounts are proper strong. There seems to be loads of clearance and I'm just dead chuffed. Turned out really good. So in the next episode, we're going to continue doing the engine bay stuff, and we're going to get all the engine bay painted, and who knows, we might even get the engine fitted. So if that kind of thing interests you, make sure to hit that like button and the subscribe button and even the hype button if you haven't already, and then you'll never miss another episode. Right, stay tuned for more, guys. I'll see you later, and goodbye.